All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name's Murray Black. I'm the Media and Communications Manager at the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, and I'm going to be the moderator for today's event. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional owners, past, present, and those to come, of the land on which I'm speaking from today, which is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the various lands from which you're all joining us today. And as we share our own knowledge, learnings and research, may we also pay respect to the knowledge embedded forever within the Aboriginal custodianship of country. So welcome to the agency's Creating Gender Equitable Procurement and Supply Chains webinar. We've got a great lineup of speakers for you today. First off, I'll introduce our Director, Libby Lyons, to give a short introduction to the agency and what we do, and more specifically, the importance of procurement processes to the issue of gender equality. After that, Dr. Sarah Oxenbridge and Dr. Natalie Galea will present the findings of their new Gender Equitable Procurement and Supply Chains Insight Paper and Guide, which has just been released today. And then we'll hear from Daniela Jaramillo from Hesta and Surjan from Pizzarotti, two organisations that are promoting gender equality through procurement processes. But before we move on, I'll just go through a bit of housekeeping. There will be a Q&A session at the end, so please type your questions in the chat panel on the right-hand side. We're recording today's event, so you've all been muted to avoid any background noise. We'd love you to share your thoughts on social media, so keep the conversation going at WGEA Agency and hashtag Power of Procurement. And then when we finish, there will be a short survey and we'd love you to fill it out because it really helps us shape our presentations for the future. So first off, I'll welcome Libby Lyons, who's Director of the Workplace Gender Equality Agency. Libby's been the agency's director since 2015, and she's also a member of Chief Executive Women and an Ambassador for Honour Award. Prior to joining the agency, Libby had a distinguished career in corporate affairs and government relations, including senior roles at BHP's Olympic Dam, Alcoa of Australia, Western Power Corporation and Telstra. Welcome, Libby.
Thank you, Murray, and welcome to everybody on this webinar. It is fabulous to have you all here. It is so important that we have you all here to learn about gender equitable procurement. I'm really looking forward to hearing from Sarah and Natalie on the incredible work that they have done in this regard, and of course from Daniela and Stephen, who bring us a very practical perspective of what they do and what can be done and what it brings to their business. That is so important that we learn from each other. But before I get into things, I would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I am meeting today, and I'm coming to you from sunny, warmish Perth, and the traditional people here are the Whadjuk Noongar people, and I acknowledge them and all other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who may have joined us today. We are all Australians, we all work together, and the knowledge that we all share through your incredible history and culture it makes us terribly proud. So thank you and welcome to everybody. For those of you who don't know too much about our agency, we were established in 2012 as a result of the Workplace Gender Equality Act, and we were the Act was brought together and the agency was formed to focus on working and collecting data from the private sector on the things that they were doing to drive gender equality in their workplaces. So anybody, any organisation in the private sector in Australia with more than 100 employees must report into us on an annual basis. The data we collect is census data. And we collect standardised data around 6 gender equality indicators. These are the workforce composition, that is the jobs that women and men do. The gender compositions of boards and governing bodies, equal pay, the support that employers have in place for those employees who have caring obligations. The consultation that employers do with their employees around gender equality, and also information on sex-based harassment and discrimination. We've been collecting data now for 7 years, and in November, late November, watch this space because we will actually be releasing our new set of data that was collected between the 1st of May and the 31st of July this year. Of course, that was snap bang in the middle of the lockdowns and the COVID-19 pandemic. We were terribly worried that we wouldn't get the data that we required from employers because of the disruptions it caused. But I am really pleased to be able to tell you that employers dug deep. They did what they do best, and that is they performed under exceptional circumstances. And we have a 98% compliance rate this year. We're thrilled with that. Normally it's about 99%. So to every employer that reported to us this year, thank you. You know, I know, the data that we collect is vital. We must measure what we're doing. When we measure what we're doing, we can manage things because we learn, we can educate one another, and we can create that very clear picture in Australia. So it is very, very important, and thank you. Today we're talking about gender equitable procurement. It is so important. Don't ever underestimate as an employer the power of your influence over those that you do business with. And it's important that you exert that influence, that you use that influence for good outcomes. And gender equality for women and men is a great outcome. So use that power of your influence. It is important, particularly because UN Women came out with some research recently that told us that just less than 1% of spending by large organisations on suppliers around the world are invested in women or female-led businesses. Less than 1%. That's not good enough. Because if we don't start investing in female-owned businesses, we are not being fair, but we're also not being smart. Because investing in female-owned businesses will significantly contribute to the world economy, generating millions of employment opportunities and spend for communities, for families. Gender equality actually should be an intrinsic part of all the work that you do, and I know for many of you it is. It's not just the right thing to do, it is the smart thing to do. And so when you are working with your organisations and your suppliers, the first thing that I would ask you to do is if they're in the private sector and they have more than 100 employees, are they compliant with the Act? Are they meeting their legal obligations? Are they reporting into the Workplace Gender Equality Agency every year? And if they are, they will be able to provide you with their letter of compliance. If they're not, I ask you to encourage them to comply or find another supplier. The other thing that you can do is have a checklist from all your suppliers that says things like, do you have a gender equality strategy and policy in place? Have you done a pay gap analysis? Do you have flexible work schemes in place? And if so, how many of your staff, women and men, are accessing that? And do you have gender equal paid parental leave? Some of those questions, when you ask employers, make them start thinking about the things that they could be doing to ensure better workplaces for all their employees. So make a commitment to workplace gender equality by working with your suppliers and exerting your influence. It's really, really important. And perhaps set targets for those suppliers, a very valuable way and a very concrete way of driving change. We are absolutely at the agency committed to affecting change in organisations through gender equitable procurement and supply chains. It's been something that we have been working quietly on for some time, and the employer of choice for gender equality citation, which some of you may well hold, and congratulations if you do, you are a leading practice organisation if you hold that citation. But this year, the citation has a new requirement, and that is to ensure that all citation holders have a procurement guidelines policy in place that encourages gender equality across its supply chain. So another way that we are working to absolutely make this happen. I'm really looking forward to the research. I'm looking forward to the speakers and learning more. I know you are too. Thank you for joining us. Your support and participation is so important to the work that we do. Thank you, Murray, and over to you.
Thank you, Libby. I think that gives everyone an idea of the importance of procurement and supply chains in gender equality. Next up, we'll hear from two researchers who've written the paper, Dr. Natalie Galea and Dr. Sarah Oxenbridge. Dr. Sarah Oxenbridge has worked in government, consultancy and academic organisations since 1999, conducting research on many aspects of work and employment, including workplace gender equality. She is currently the Senior Research and Advocacy Officer at the Smith family. Dr. Natalie Galea is a postdoctoral fellow at the Australian Human Rights Institute, UNSW Sydney. She studies human rights and gender equity in the construction centre and human rights in elite sport. Prior to moving into academia, Natalie worked for almost 2 decades as a construction project manager in Australia and the Middle East. Welcome, Sarah and Natalie.
Hello, everybody. Well, I wait for Sarah to join us because she's leading us off today.
Should I start, Murray?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. Okay, look, thanks so much for joining us today. The report, which is out now, is structured into 2 sections, and the first half I'll summarise, and it provides some background on what gender equitable procurement is and the main models or forms that it takes. The second half, which Natalie's going to review, profiles options for encouraging gender equality in supply chains at both the policy and organisational levels. Just before I get started, just a few comments about the report. When we sat down to write it during lockdown, we discovered that there was surprisingly little academic or practice-oriented literature on this topic. So we scoured a number of research databases with very little success. So the report primarily draws on grey literature, which is intended for policy or practice audiences. A recent example you might have seen of a report of this nature is the Femiconomy AICD guide that was launched in March of this year. So we drew on that in a number of similar reports brought out by organisations such as UN Women. But we can't work out whether this is an issue, that this is something that's going on. People are using gender equitable procurement processes, but it's just not being documented. Whether we can't work out why there's an absence of information and research, really, whether they're being used but not documented, possibly because they're commercial in confidence, or whether they're not actually being used to any great extent. So we'd be really interested to hear your views on this in the Q&A. Either way, we feel it would be really beneficial to build up a base of research in this area and a base of best practice for other organisations to draw on. So, Murray, can I have the first slide, please? Oh, we've got it. Great. Okay, so we define gender equitable procurement as processes for procuring goods and services that are designed to improve gender equality objectives in the supplying organisation or the procuring organisation. And when we looked at the available research, it indicated that in many countries, government intervention is the main driver of gender equitable procurement. And this is primarily through public procurement processes. So our report profiles examples of these policy settings in the US and UK, and it briefly mentions the new public procurement processes in Victoria, which are very new, but it'll be really interesting to see what their effect is. And Libby spoke earlier about the agency's procurement principles and employer of choice criteria. So I'll just really briefly summarise some of the benefits of gender equitable procurement that have been established in the research. And Libby spoke to some of these. They include, firstly, innovation and market stability, because you're sourcing from a broader pool of diverse suppliers. A second benefit is improved female labour market participation. And this is because female-owned businesses tend to employ more women, but also because procuring entities might stipulate targets to increase female workforce representation. And third are the commercial benefits for organisations. So these result from suppliers better meeting the needs of the female market and from enhanced brand loyalty among female consumers. So second slide, please. Great, thank you. So in reviewing the research, we found 4 main types of processes that fit with our definition of gender equitable procurement. So the first is procurement from women-owned businesses. And this is where organisations intentionally provide selling opportunities to female-owned businesses, or they award contracts to them. And we found that a relatively large number of countries have policy settings designed to increase the public procurement share of women-owned enterprises. We also found that governments can use a variety of mechanisms to do this. So some award greater points in the tender evaluation process to female-owned suppliers. Others set aside a portion of the procurement budget to allocate to female suppliers, similar to the Indigenous procurement program. The second category is where procurement is used by procuring organisations to promote gender equality in their supplier organisations. So Libby again gave some examples of this. You're effectively building gender equality down and across your supply chain. And the primary means of doing this is by taking suppliers' gender equality performance into account when awarding or renewing contracts, and this puts pressure on suppliers to improve their performance. So this might take the form of procuring organisations asking suppliers to field gender balanced teams, for example in professional services organisations, or requesting data on female leadership representation or gender pay gaps during the tender evaluation process. The third category is where organisations award contracts to suppliers with the aim of improving gender equality in their organisation, that is the procuring organisation. So in the report, we include examples such as BHP engaging suppliers who design workwear specifically for female BHP employees, and organisations contracting executive search firms that commit to providing gender equal recruitment pools and interviewee shortlists. The final category is where owners or budget holders use their influence to progress gender equality in downstream organisations. So a first example is where institutional investors use their position as asset owners to improve gender representation in their investee companies. And we'll hear from Daniela soon about this, about Hesta's initiatives in this space. Or they use it to appoint women to leadership roles in companies in their investment portfolios, for example, in the case of venture capital. A second model within this category is voluntary charters that commit organisations to increasing the share of work given to women. So probably a known example here is the equitable briefing policy established by the Law Council of Australia, and this commits organisations to allocating a certain proportion of briefs to female legal professionals. So this is a very broad brush approach. There's more detail in the report. Hopefully it's given you a sense of the range of mechanisms that are currently used to encourage gender equality throughout the supply chain. But I'm going to hand to Natalie now, who's going to talk about how we might progress gender equitable procurement. Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, so I'm really going to focus in on gender equitable procurement and what it looks like in practice. And in our report, and obviously it's already been mentioned as well by both Sarah and Libby, we found a range of practical and tractable actions that government and business has taken to shift gender equality through procurement practices. And I'll step through a few of these, starting with government-directed reform and moving to reform that can be actioned by both government and business. In our report, we found that government has the scope and power to shift gender equality through public procurement reform. And firstly, government reform could make explicit the requirement that selecting women-owned businesses is a key objective. Setting targets or quotas for the percentage of procurement contracts awarded to women-owned businesses, creating business incentives to contract to women-owned businesses, and driving gender parity amongst procurement professionals are 3 reform levers. And because women-owned businesses tend to be small and have less access to information relating to public procurement processes, government reform could focus on redressing the market barriers to women-owned businesses. In relation to public procurement, this could mean minimising the administrative burden on women-owned businesses by, for example, streamlining the tender process. Government reform could also take the form of funding centralised coordination and support organisation for women-owned businesses to certify, promote, capacity build and advocate for them. Aside from women-owned businesses, government directed reform could also focus on a range of other policy settings. These might include, for example, putting gender on the tender by 1, requiring all firms bidding to disclose their gender equality data, 2, mandating preferential treatment of suppliers that apply rigorous gender equality policies, report improvements in gender equality indicators, set gender equality targets, and apply different types of work arrangements to boost gender equality. And 3, to set an evaluation criteria that, as Sarah mentioned, scores highly those organisations who demonstrate a commitment to women's employment and work practices that support gender equality, and making sure that what is promised actually does occur. So in other words, rewarding compliance and setting penalties for non-compliance. The last large post-COVID-19 infrastructure projects announced by the Australian federal government provide an excellent opportunity for government to pilot these initiatives and approaches. For instance, funding could be provided to group training organisations that recruit, train and support female trade apprentices, particularly in male-dominated sectors. And in addition, project delivery models could allow for different work practices such as part-time and share roles, 5-day work week schedules that promote gender equality within the infrastructure and construction sector, and also promote gender equality outside the sector by ensuring that the partners of construction workers' employment and economic security is not constrained by the work practices within the construction sector. Procuring relationships, though, are a two-way street, and government reform can be driven and led by business who can demonstrate to government the viability of reform. And we'll hear about this a bit later. Can I have this? Oh, great, we're on to this slide. The report also sets out other actions procuring organisations in government and private sector can also undertake. And as Sarah noted, there are a number of step-by-step guides available in Australia from Fem Economy and the 30% Club, but also internationally that you could refer to. Crucial to incorporating gender equality into an organisation's procurement process is visible leadership commitment, particularly in order to get procurement staff enthused and engaged in turning policies into everyday practices. Building capacity and capability for gender equality procurement within organisations is equally important. This means ensuring that procurement staff have appropriate experience and knowledge required to establish and manage gender equitable procurement processes. We suggest embedding diversity and inclusion experts within procurement teams or establishing a joint working group between diversity and procurement staff. The transfer of this knowledge to each level of the supply chain via training, annual audit and enforcement is also necessary. Businesses might also consider enhancing the transparency around procurement practices and establishing a focused approach that builds their supply chain of women-owned businesses by hosting information events and by changing their procurement requirements to accommodate often smaller size capabilities of women-owned businesses. And like the recommendations for government reform, the private sector, as Libby and Sarah allude to, might also consider putting gender on the tender and building gender equality into each point of the procurement process, starting with a pre-qualification of suppliers that assesses the supplier's track record in relation to gender equality. Gender equality procurement is a reciprocal process. If a client is asking, for instance, for suppliers to field a balanced and diverse working team to deliver their work, the client will also need to accommodate the needs of that team. In other words, the client might need to accommodate flexible work arrangements when managing deadlines and the availability of the supplier's team members. Procuring organisations might also consider including in their tender requests an innovation in inclusion section in which suppliers cost separately initiatives designed to deliver the project in new and innovative ways that aim to enhance gender equality and shift gender segregation, particularly in male-dominated sectors. Organisations also could look beyond the procurement of goods and services, and as Sarah said, review how they procure recruitment search services of human resources to ensure that gender bias is removed from recruitment and selection processes of employees. And finally, as Sarah also has noted, we're certain that there are many ways and many other ways that government and businesses are using procurement as a lever to shift gender equality, both upstream in influencing clients, but also downstream and across in influencing supply chains. If your business or department has designed or piloted innovative approaches that have worked or even failed, please share those lessons with WGEA so that we can all improve how we shift gender equality through procurement together. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie and Sarah. That was a fantastic overview of your terrific paper, which is now live on our website if you want to go and have a look and read it all for yourself. As I mentioned earlier, we are going to have a Q&A session at the end. So I'm sure after hearing Natalie and Sarah, you've all got lots of questions. Please use our chat function on the right-hand side and drop in your questions. All our speakers would love to answer them today. So now let's hear about how gender equality procurement can work in practice from two very different organisations. First up, we have Daniela Jaramillo, who is the Senior Representative Investment Advisor at the industry super fund Hesta. Hello, Daniela. Daniela is focused on integrating the Sustainable Development Goals into Hesta's investment strategy. And then she's also the chair of the investor group of a terrific new initiative, which we were involved with at the agency, the 40-40 Vision, which is an initiative to improve gender diversity in leadership positions in Australia's largest companies. Welcome, Daniela, and thank you for being here today.
Hi, Murray. Thank you very much for the invite. Yeah, so perhaps I'll explain a little bit of where we're coming from. Sarah did give a little bit of an idea of how Hesta pushes for more gender diversity across our value chain. But I'll start by saying, by telling you a little bit about Hesta. So Hesta manages around $52 billion in pension funds for people mainly in the health and community sector services. And about 80% of all our members are actually women. So we have close to 850 members, and so you can tell that's a large number of members that are women. But that's not the only reason why we care about gender diversity. And perhaps I'll explain a little bit about my role. My role is as a senior responsible investment advisor. I'm not necessarily an expert in human resources or procurement. But the way we look at gender diversity, we see it as a massive opportunity that will allow us to deliver better outcomes for members. We look at it deeply in our portfolio companies that are in that we invest in. And so we believe that teams that are diverse make better decisions. Their extensive research, even with Gia and Banquist Curtin published a paper earlier this year, really demonstrating not only a correlation but more of a causation between gender diversity and performance of ASX 200 companies. So we truly believe that it can help organizations manage risk better and perform better. So we expect this in the organizations that we invest in, and we're involved in initiatives that you might be aware, like the 30% Club, and we work together also with AXI in engaging with companies for better board diversity. However, we're mindful that boards are not the only groups that make decisions on behalf of organizations. And so we saw the need of actually focusing on gender diversity across all the levels that help and build our investment value chain. This includes senior leadership in those investment companies. And so Mary has just referred to an initiative that Hesta launched earlier this month called 40/40 Vision, where we're actually asking ASX 200 companies, so the largest companies in Australia, to set targets to improve the gender diversity in executive leadership. So I was talking about all the groups that make investment decisions on behalf of our members. So we start with executive leadership in the companies that we're invested in. The boards are another group that helps guide the strategy of those companies. We want to ensure that those groups are diverse enough. But then to tell you a little bit of how we're structured, we don't invest directly in those companies ourselves. We do it through a series of investment managers across different asset classes. And so we thought, if we believe that gender diversity adds value to decision making, we should ensure that our investment managers also have a certain level of diversity in the groups that are making those investment decisions of which companies to invest on. So some of you might be aware, but the investment in the financial industry is one of the laggards across other industries and the lack of diversity. It's truly appalling. Sarah published a paper, I believe, a couple of years ago, just showing how deep the problem is. And this is not only in Australia. This is a problem that's global. So we really saw the need of working a solution in which we can engage and advocate with our investment managers for better diversity in the groups that are making investment decisions on our behalf. Also, to provide a bit of context about the relationship with those managers, it's usually we have long-term relationships with these organizations. We have, I believe, close to 70, perhaps more than 70 managers at the moment in our portfolio, and these are long-term relationships. We see them more as partnerships. So we really wanted to make sure that we're not only replacing them, and because it's a problem in the industry as well. It's not that that we have many more organizations that are diverse. We really want to work with them and also send a clear message that this is something that matters to us, and that we believe that their teams will be better if they have gender diversity in the decision making. So the first step that we took was in 2018, where we actually surveyed all our managers. We asked them explicitly to tell us about the gender diversity in the teams that are making investment decisions. Traditionally in finance and in investments, we see that perhaps there are more women in roles that are related to human resources, marketing, or even investor and the people that manage account managers. But when it comes to actually portfolio manager and analysts, which are the ones making decisions on our behalf, it's usually very male dominated. So we started by doing that a survey in 2018, and we actually found that the average across all our managers was 70% women. So it was quite low when we looked at that specific group. What we also did when we did the surveys, we asked and there were obviously some better performers than others, some master classes that were better performers than others. And so we asked them what were they doing to try to improve this, because this is no secret about these challenges in the industry. And so we were able to create a report with those results and share back with all our managers that what were the people that were doing better and that were being able to recruit and retain female talent, what were they doing that was working for them? So I think that was one of the key steps. And now we've done the survey again in 2020, and we're actually awaiting the results this week. So it'd be interesting to see, and hopefully we've achieved some progress. In addition to this, we've actually all of the teams that manage the relationships and have regular catch-ups with those managers, they're constantly asking, because obviously our role is to select and to understand the quality of those teams. And so we're regularly asking them, especially the ones that have less diversity, we're asking them what are they doing. If we know that there's going to be a position that's going to open, or they're talking about expanding the teams, we're asking them how are they ensuring that they are recruiting for more women in those roles. This is something that comes up in regular catch-ups, and I think that this pressure is actually working. We've seen some of the managers even come and share with us what has worked for them in the past, and we're able to share this back with the rest. Whenever we're appointing a new manager, we ask them to disclose the number of women, and before making a decision of appointing a manager, if we see that they have no women or they have very little women, we will come back and ask the question as to why is that the reason, or what are they doing about it, and we'll definitely take it into consideration before making a decision to invest in them. So those have been a few of the they didn't only ask about composition, promotions, and people that have left in the teams. We also asked a few other questions that related a bit more to culture. We asked about pay gap, and we asked about how they're actually handling issues like sexual harassment, for example, and if they have the right processes, and also about their parental leave policies. Because from our research, we found that one of the reasons while women might start at the same level as men earlier in their careers, they usually drop off at the age of having children, because work-life balance, but also because sometimes they're not there's not an attractive culture or the flexible working options for this. So we're asking them this year. Again, it will be interesting to see the results. Finally, I just wanted to share something. As I mentioned, this is a problem that's not a specific manager, but it's a problem that we see as an industry-wide problem. And so a step that Hesta took following this survey was we joined together with other asset owners and asset managers in the industry that recognize the problem in the pipeline, and we actually participated of a program called Future Impact, which aimed to attract not only more women, but more diverse talent to the industry. And we created an employee value proposition, which actually talked a lot and sold a different story about investment management that perhaps was a bit different. We noticed that the perception that many women at university had about investment management was things that they had seen in the movies, and thinking that it's something like in the 90s in the Wolf of Wall Street. So we really felt the need of changing that perception of the industry and actually talk about all the big opportunities, like the opportunity to invest to mitigate climate change, or the opportunity to invest in solutions and build better cities, or invest in new technologies that might solve and address many health problems that the world has. And so we by identifying what were those diverse candidates looking for, this value proposition actually managed to reach out to those people in university or early stages in their career, and sell the industry as a better as something that they might want to be part of. So this has been Feature Impact has been quite successful, and I believe that it's now potentially expanding to the US and to the UK. But we do think that in certain cases, like in the finance and investment management, there is the need for this work at the more industry level and for groups to get together and try to solve the problem as a collective, not only as individuals. Questions.
Great, thank you, Daniela, for that terrific overview of what Hesta's doing in this area, the great work that you're doing. Just to let you know, the paper that Natalie and Sarah have written is called Gender Equitable Procurement and Supply Chains, and it's available under the WGEA research section on our website. Now we have one final speaker before we throw to the virtual floor for our Q&A session. So please keep the questions coming in. We've got a few interesting ones already, so we'd love to have some more. Our last speaker today is Stephen Surjan, who's Head of Operations at the construction firm Roberts Pizzarotti. Stephen was previously the Operations Manager in New South Wales ACT for Lend-Lease's building business and worked for Abbey Group prior to its amalgamation with Lend-Lease, as well as Grocon and Balderstone Hornibrook. So welcome, Stephen. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Murray. Thanks for having me. Firstly, I just want to start by giving a bit of an overview of the construction industry in general. It's the third largest employer in Australia, generates over 360 billion in revenue, producing around 9% of Australia's GDP. And its projected annual growth is around 2.4% in the next 5 years. So from that perspective, it's an ideal time for us to focus on strategies to support gender equity in procurement. Women currently only make up 18.3% of the workforce in construction, with the majority of them in support or clerical positions. And this is not showing any significant change, and using procurement policies to drive that is definitely needed. Roberts Pizzarotti was formed in 2017 with a vision of building a better way. We were in a strong position to have a positive impact on our people, our clients, the community, and our partners. And a lot of what was shaped about our business was what didn't work in previous businesses that we had been involved with over the previous years. We wanted to create a sustainable success in the industry, and we think that gender diversity would support this. We started with ourselves first, and before engaging with the supply chain, we set targets and initiatives across the business that will create value for our clients as well as our employees. Some of these key initiatives that we focused on were we offered true workplace flexibility for our employees, providing technology to allow them to work flexibly, flexible start and finish times for school drop-offs and pickups, and also flexible work arrangements in terms of working from home or working both in head office and on sites. Policies around paid parental leave. In addition to annual leave, we provide 3 wellbeing days per year, and staff can also purchase annual leave as well. We set ourselves some gender diversity targets. We wanted 35% female representation, but we're currently sitting at 30% in professional roles. That's engineers, design, and commercial roles. And 70% of our cadets are currently female. We offered an online learning capability for all our construction workers and employees. We provide a 5-day work week option for all of our projects to clients with an alternative program. The gender pay equity is like for roles, so we currently have 0% gender pay gap. And in terms of our processes such as talent reviews, promotions, salary reviews, etc., we've added the gender lens to that to ensure that there's no unconscious bias. We've even set standards for ourselves in terms of how we set up our site amenities on projects where we have specific toilet and change facilities on site with safety considerations. So showers have lockable doors and they're undercover, as well as the male facilities. breastfeeding facilities with a fridge made available for female workers. And look, for many people, you might think that sounds odd, but that has certainly been lacking and wanting in our industry for quite some time. So in terms of from a procurement perspective, we took a slightly different approach where when we tendered the Concord Hospital Redevelopment Project for New South Wales State Government. Now, generally, companies that currently compete for projects in New South Wales need to comply with government procurement policies for construction. And some of these include, at the moment, Aboriginal participation in construction, where the minimum target's about 1.5%. 20% of the labour force has to be made up of learning workers. 20% of all trade positions on site are to be made up of apprentices. And more recently, so that was essentially the parameters that we had to tender for the project back in 2018. More recently, they've added doubling number of women in trade-related positions to 2%. Yeah, that's correct, 2%. Currently at 1%. And recent inclusion has also been 8% of the total workforce to be under the age of 25. So bearing in mind that that was something that we had to provide to the government as part of our tender, along with our competitors, we thought we would do something a little bit different at Concord and offer up a 5-day week program option to the client. The most important part of this was that the client was willing to commit to the initiative, and that's a key aspect to it. We provided a 5-day week program, which was overall within their overall program, and it was obviously a bit longer than our 6-day program. But at the end of the day, the cost increase for that additional time was about 1.2% of the contract, and that did not include any costs for any of the subbies. When we actually rang the subbies at the time, when we were committing to the program and the cost, basically all the subbies said no extra cost, because at the end of the day they looked at it from a perspective of the number of man hours completed per week. So provided that they were doing the same number within a 5-day work week versus a 6-day work week, it was all about they looked at it from a production perspective rather than focusing on Monday to Saturday. We also then chose to study the project and the impacts on both blue and white collar workers, as well as their extended families, and that's where obviously the mention in the study came in, because we've been doing that with Natalie. We also ensured that the subbies, when we were actually engaging them, that they were making sure that they were completely aware that the project was a 5-day work week project, Monday to Friday, a weekend for every worker, and that they weren't then moving their employees to other projects on a Saturday or a Sunday. Essentially, the people that were working there were working sort of Monday to Friday. Initially, we had some pushback from the market. I mean, technically at the moment we still get pushback from the from the market in terms of some of our competitors. We had support from the union initially, but it was cautious. It was cautious support because no one had really done it on this scale. So at the end of the day, we were always going to be a bit of a test case when it came to that. But the feedback from the workers was overwhelming, and the feedback the union got from the workers, I think, surprised them a little bit as well. Again, there were a lot of people telling us that it won't work. Some of the workers themselves said, "Oh, this is new. We'll give it a go." But now they realise they've actually got a fair chunk of their life back, and it's created a better home life for them and their families. And part of it, as I said before, part of the study was also looking at the impacts of their extended families. So we're actually interviewing, you know, their partners to understand what the, you know, what impacts they've seen both to their home life and also to the participation of their partner to the actual family lives, you know, Saturday sports, etc., etc. It's truly been amazing. We most recently we also signed our EBA more recently, and part of that we managed to get the 5-day work week included within that agreement. So essentially we can do either a 5-day work week on projects or adopt the union calendar, which has every second Monday off as a roster day off. So on the 5-day week projects, people can work Monday to Friday and actually take their RDOs on the Saturdays. So it provides that, I suppose, that flexibility. Where that works as well is that there's, you know, from a supply chain perspective, you know, it enables a much more broader base for us to actually employ off. And you know, we've got four of our construction workers on site that are directly employed by us are female, and you know, we one of them actually does school pickup and school or school drop off, depending on what she arranges with her partner. And she said to us, if it wasn't for the Concord project, yeah, she wouldn't have got back into the construction industry. So having that opportunity to you know, I suppose, have that 5-day option has been really good. In terms of things that we can see, I suppose Natalie touched on it before about the government, I suppose, stepping up and taking it initiative. There's already initiative there, but other ones could be that we have you know, agreed percentages on project value to support female-owned businesses. You know, setting targets for tenders and their supply chains for female participation at all levels. At the moment, the only one is just the one relating to trade work. Gender pay equity, equal opportunity policies such as parental leave and health and wellbeing, mandating 5-day week projects, in particular for the construction industry, provision of suitable workplace conditions on projects for women to encourage participation in ensuring safety, and what I touched on before about secure facilities on site for them, and tenders to provide information on their internal workplace profile and details of their policies and programs to increase the diversity to encourage a gender focus. So there's some of the things that we think that you know, obviously can be implemented in terms of requests for tender moving forward, because then it really will, I suppose, galvanise the focus that companies will have on achieving targets and actually looking to make change in a positive way.
Thanks so much, Stephen. That was a really terrific overview, and there's a lot of interest in the work your company's doing with that 5-day working week at Concord Hospital. A bit of a benchmark for what can happen and change in the construction industry. So now we move over to our Q&A session. We've had quite a few questions come through. We may not get to them all. We've only got really about 7 or 8 minutes. We'll see how we go. If we don't get to your question, we can get the panelists to respond to you directly afterwards. So the first question, it's to the researchers, but I think it's probably applicable more broadly, and it's from Ellen Muir. I'm particularly interested in how the researchers and companies used data to get support for change and develop the policy approaches. Was it essential, or was it used to give a bit of support to a good idea? Perhaps if Natalie or Sarah might like to respond first, and then we can move across to Stephen and Daniela if they wish to comment on that one.
I'll start off while I wait for Sarah to join us. I think data always gives or paints a picture, a very clear picture, and also really hones the focus of clients. But I also, given that I'm currently working on a project where we're collecting data and also it's informing policy currently, I think that the two can be done at once. So I think that you don't have to have all the data collected, but it certainly supports the case, and it can be drip fed into to policymakers who are constructing policy. And obviously policies aren't set in stone, so they can be adapted and changed accordingly. Sarah, did you have anything?
Yeah, just one example that we gave in the report was BHP has a dashboard for all of its, I think I've got this correct, for all of its suppliers. And if they dip below the target levels, then that means that it's more difficult for them to go for contract renewal. So there's kind of real-time monitoring of the targets that have been set in place and data acquisition over, over a long period, the duration of the contract. So I really like that approach. I think that that's fantastic for enforcement, basically.
Great. Look, well, I've also got a more general question, really, just about the benefits and the business case for gender equitable procurement. I mean, for Natalie and for Sarah, what does research tell us about the business case? But also Daniela and Stephen, I mean, why did you do it? What made Hesta and Pizzarotti go down this path towards gender equitable procurement from a business case perspective? Maybe Natalie and Sarah, if you want to start off.
Yeah, look, there's not much out there. There's certainly not much academic research. Quite a few of the guides by organisations like the UN would start out with a kind of a précis of the benefits. One of them that came through from quite a few of them was the amelioration of risk, that if you've got a broader pool to draw on, then there's greater market stability and more innovation as well. But I'll leave it to the experts.
Happy to share our experience. We've seen consistent research in having women in senior leadership positions actually does improve performance. As I mentioned, there's the paper by Wijia and Banquist Curtin, but that's just many. I think there's been a lot of research before that also proving this. So we tend to apply the same rationale for that. I know that Frontier, one of the investment consultants, also did some research where they actually proved that relationship between performance. I think at this point we haven't really conducted research to see within our managers, but I think to the previous question about how has data helped us, I think it's definitely seeing the level of the problem once we got the data was definitely something that prompted us to do something, but also understanding where the problem was also helped us have better conversations. We realized a lot of it was around retention, so we knew how to ask questions to our managers about that retention. So I think yeah, the data was definitely important for us in that engagement.
Can I just add in there, Murray, I think the business case broadly for gender equality is terribly, terribly clear. It's unequivocal, and more evidence and research comes out every day. So by extension of that, it has to, as night follows day, one could assume that ensuring that we have gender equitable procurement follows, that the business case to ensure that all the organisations that work with you are addressing gender equality, feeds into that very general business case. I think that that's just, that common sense. But you're right, there's no real research, a lot of research that's been doing it in that area. Common sense tells me if it's good broadly, it's got to play in, the same's got to play into procurement as well.
Yeah. Now we've got, this is really a comment rather than a question. It's quite an interesting one we might want to just talk further about is one of our attendees has said, I think it's important to highlight that organisations, that many of the women-owned businesses are run by women who used to work in the corporate sector. It's a win-win to get these businesses. I mean, is that something you've noticed in your organisations, Daniela, Stephen, or in your research, Natalie and Sarah? And I mean, how do you think that trend is going to play out in the coming years?
I think in professional services, it's undeniable that there are quite a few female refugees from the corporate sector who have gone out on their own or with another woman to set up a small consultancy. Really, really difficult for those small businesses to come up against the might of, say, for example, the big four consultancies or, you know, larger market players. So I think that instead of going for the default contractor, I think it would be great if organisations could just look a little bit more widely at who's out there and take that into consideration when they're engaging professional services in particular.
And I think it's also a positive because it means that these women aren't lost forever, that there is a retention of them within the business community. And also their skill and knowledge retains, and it's one way of making sure that, you know, you're really tapping back into that expertise and engaging with it again.
Yeah, I might just add a little bit of the investment perspective, and there is a challenge here because usually for investment managers, we actually look for a track record of teams, not only track record of people, and so women setting up their own organizations with a different team, it's sometimes a challenge. And so I think that that's one of the barriers that perhaps there are in the investment management. I don't know, Sarah, if you found anything different in when you did your research, but I think that that's definitely something that's keeping the number of asset managers with women on leadership positions that have set up their own thing, perhaps a little bit as outsiders.
Great. Well, look, thank you all. Sorry, Stephen.
I was just going to say, obviously, working for a company with a female CEO and a female CFO certainly makes us different in the construction space. And at the end of the day, to answer the question is that it gives you a much better market pool. At the end of the day, you know, one of the engineers that we have working for us, she was told she couldn't be an engineer anymore because she had kids and it won't work from a site perspective. So at the end of the day, it was then pigeonholing her into what she could do, and we gave her the opportunity to be an engineer, and she's done it from start to finish on a project, working 3 days a week, and one of those days is at home and on site, and it's worked for her, it's worked for our team, and it's just bucking that trend of everyone saying that something can't be done. You've actually got to go out and actually do it. You know, and unfortunately, we're in an industry where we've got to prove always to everybody that something else can be done, and what's the norm.
Thank you. Well, we're going to have to wrap it up here. We're just over time. Thank you all so much for your involvement today. It's been a really, really great and informative session, and I hope you've all out there found it worthwhile. We're going to be able to send out a link to the paper to all of you, and for those of you who didn't get your questions answered, we can also answer them for you as well. You can keep the conversation going on social media by tagging us at WGEA Agency and hashtag Power of Procurement. And also, as I mentioned at the beginning, please stay on after we've finished. There's a short survey. We'd love to get your feedback because it really helps us shape how we do these things in the future. So thanks very much, everyone, and have a great rest of the day.